Hello and welcome. For this activity, we were assigned with coming up and creating a PowerPoint explaining how we would handle situations found in Chapter 8, which is focusing on teaching kids writing. So the first thing I have is the how writing develops and the 5 stages of it. So the first stage that kids are most likely going to begin with is the scribbling and drawing stage. This is where the first steps are taken. They basically could be using things such as pencils, crayons, pens, anything that they can put to paper and just do something with the space. This isn't necessarily something that is concrete and they have an understanding of. This could be anything. This could be random shapes, anything that they come to think of. Next, they'll move on to the pre-phonemic stage, which is where they begin to use real letters, but they don't understand the meaning behind them. This could be random orders, patterns, anything of the such. There is no set reason to why they choose it, but they're beginning to pick up the letters and they begin to kind of shape ideas about them. Next one is the use of the early phonemic stage. This is where they use letters to represent words. They aren't necessarily correct in the ones they choose, but letters are starting to get meaning. They are starting to kind of understand them and kind of form them into more proper ways of use. Next, we move on to the letter naming stage, where they begin to use larger syllable words. This is bigger than single syllables. It can be like house or anything that to a young child could be perceived as a larger syllable. They're starting to actually understand the names of the letters and put them to use properly. And then the final stage that we have here is the transitional stage. This is a mix of phonetic and conventional spellings. This is where they're starting to make words, but not necessarily have the full grasp. They know what they want to say and they know how they want to say it, but they don't know quite how to properly use it. They could use the word house, but spell it like hose. They forget a U. They know what they mean, but it's not necessarily always correct because they're sounding it out, but they also are understanding the way that they're meant to be used. Alright, so the next slide that we're moving on to is the 6-trait writing model. What this is it consists of 6 traits. The first one is going to be ideas and content. In this one, the teacher is trying to figure out how well the student is explaining it through their examples, facts, and anecdotes. How well are they bringing the content into their story and making it understood on what they're trying to say. These can be important concepts like places, people, anything of that nature, any idea that they can put to paper and kind of make their story around. The next trait is organization. This one, the teacher is looking at the students, the structure of the written composition. How well are they following the way things are meant? Is there a flow and order to the way they write, and kind of are they following the organization necessary? Next trait is voice. They want to understand the students or the writer's quality of expression. Are they choosing the proper toning and things for their words? This one's a little harder for students because they don't necessarily grasp under putting the proper voice into words. When they're reading, when they're reading it out loud, they struggle because they don't understand the way things are meant to be based on how they're written sometimes, and that's where you get some of these oddities in the way students are. They're monotone in situations that they shouldn't be, but they don't realize it because they don't recognize the voice need. The next trait we have is word choice. This is where the teacher wants to make sure the student or the writer is using the appropriate word to the topic. Yes, there are many words that could fit into a situation, but a teacher's goal is to make sure a student is using the best word or the most adequate word for the situation. This is a smaller one, and this can be more nitty-gritty in the way a teacher looks at it, because the appropriate word in most situations can be multitude of words, but when a teacher really wants it to be a finite word, they can kind of limit it and help a student get to that end goal. The next trait is sentence fluency. This is where the teacher wants to understand the writer's understanding and application of structures of language. This is where the words need to flow properly. It kind of relates sort of back to organization, where if you have a proper organization, then the sentence can work. This can be like punctuation, anything of that nature to help give a flow to the way the words are written. The final trait is conventions. This is the mechanics of writing. Do they understand the grammar and the spelling and the punctuation, kind of the final touching points that a student will look forward to? They aren't necessarily, this is the final step that they want to kind of finite the way they write and understand, because this is the big step in bringing it all together. Next slide is the evidence-based teaching practices on writing instruction. Okay, so they say a teacher needs to provide time every day for students to write. This is typically split 30 and 30. 30 minutes is based on kind of teaching the students how things are meant to work, and then 30 minutes of the student putting it into practice and working on it and kind of helping grasp an understanding of what the teacher's trying to promote for the students to learn. They also need to learn there's different purposes of writing. The different purposes can be description. This is where you're trying to describe like a person, place, an object. This is kind of a broad one because this is the most common for young students because it helps build an understanding of writing. Narration, they're trying to tell a story for people to follow. Informative is basically they're trying to teach somebody something new and something that they might not have otherwise known. Persuasion is they're trying to get someone to agree with their way of thinking. It's hard to not use the word persuade when talking about persuasion because obviously that's where it roots from. And then finally is disciplinary literacy. This is kind of testing their understanding of the way writing is supposed to work, and it kind of bases it off of that. Then the students need to learn to understand the process. What this is there's multitude of different steps. There's pre-writing, which is where they're getting the idea on what they want to write and kind of envisioning how they want it to go down. And they move on to drafting, where they're putting it to paper. This isn't the final draft, so they are just getting a rough idea on. Then they're going back and revising and editing and working to kind of crispen it up, make it look better and sharper for students to follow. And finally, they want to publish it. Publishing in a older sense is kind of making it so everyone can read it or understand it. For students, there's many different ways that they can publish. They can do what's called the author chair, where they kind of sit down and explain what they're talking about. You can do pen pals, you can do newsletters, yearbooks, anything that gives the writer an audience to kind of listen to what they've written is a form of publishing according to the textbook. The next slide is the response to intervention in Tier 2 writing. So Tier 2 is basically where a student needs more help with language development. They are getting to what they need to know, but they just need a little bit more inching. Typically, when students go to Tier 2, they will eventually drop back down to Tier 1 where they don't need quite as much help. But there could be multiple different things. People could have development problems. They could be foreign language students kind of coming to learn the language as a whole. So a good thing that you can do is quick writes. Quick writes are basically a teacher poses a question to the class and they set a time period for the student to work in. Oftentimes, or according to the book, a good time window would be 10 minutes. This gives the student a goal on what to work for, but it also sets a pace that they need to follow because they don't want to go too slow and not portray their thought. They also don't want to go too fast where they run out and don't have enough to talk about. In the book, it mentions the POW and TREE, which are two separate acronyms. The first one, POW, stands for pick my idea, organize my notes and ideas, and then write and say more. This is just basically essentially following the guideline of setting what you want to talk about, organize it in a way that makes sense, and then just write. Get onto the paper what you want to say, and that will help everyone involved. And then on the other hand, TREE stands for topic, sentence, reasons, examine, and ending. Topic sentence can be, again, the idea you want to talk about. reasons are kind of the organization on what's happening. In the textbook, it kind of said you want at least 3 reasons. Examine is where you look back and make sure everything flows and works properly, and then ending could be that kind of publishing and finalizing it so everything is over with. And then the next one is generous reading. This one is where the teachers allow the students to write and kind of say what they want to say and allow everyone to hear it. They overlook grammar or spelling errors because they're not focused on necessarily the small intricacies, but more they want to focus on understanding that the student is portraying their thoughts. Things aren't perfect, but they're attempting to write. Even that is helpful. And then the next one is interactive writing. This one is made up of a bunch of steps. You begin with a shared activity. Basically, you can read a story, you can do a bunch of different things, but something that incorporates the entire class so that everyone gets involved. Next, you're going to plan the text. Basically, you're to kind of dictate what you want them to work on, but you're not necessarily going to force them into a different way. Next one, you're going to model the writers. You're going to kind of narrow it down even more than just planning the text. Next one is sharing the marker. Basically, this is where students this is the individual one with the teachers, where they kind of come over and they work with the teacher and they kind of work towards the whole, but on an individual basis. Next one, you want to go to rereading. This is where the student goes back through and they make sure that everything that they wrote down makes sense and is understandable. They don't want any random things that are going to get lost in translation. Then finally, you're going to transition to independent writing. It starts off where the teacher is helping, and then you're going to want to work towards where the student is able to do more on their own and kind of get out there and maybe get a proc to lead off and then work off on their own. Next thing we're going to do is drawing before writing. This is a simple one. Basically, oftentimes you may struggle for words on when you're writing. You don't know exactly what you want to say, but you have the idea. So drawing it out just kind of lets it out in the open and kind of helps people to understand, maybe without having to be on the same barrier of language. Next one is motivating and engaging students. Book talks is where a student can kind of read a book and give a little bit of a speech on it, kind of tell a little bit about it and try to make it interesting for other students. School-wide photo library, people take pictures and allow the students to kind of work through and base off the picture what they think might be happening and then incorporate that all into a big book that allows everyone to get involved. Author's chair, again, back to publishing. This is where a student writes something and they are proud and they want to show it off and allow everyone to see it. And then finally, celebrate writing achievements. Everybody wants to know that everyone is proud of what they did, and it helps everyone to get involved. The writing workshop, 5 phases. The teacher sharing time, this is where the teacher is giving examples to help the students involved. It helps to get everything typically 5 to 10 minutes. Mini lessons, this is where you get discussions about the activities. The teacher is kind of showing ways that the student could follow suit. Again, this is a 5 to 10 minute process. State of the class, this is where you make a list of every student involved and then show where they're at in the pre-writing, drafting, revising, editing. And then the workshop activity is 4 activities. There's pre-writing / drafting, peer conferencing, editing, and preparing for publishing. Some of the problems, students want to work at their own pace. They may lose interest. They may have too much peer conference. Own pace is good, except where everyone kind of gets separated. A solution would be to kind of set a schedule that they have to follow. Loss of interest. Student doesn't want to keep working. Allow them to change so that they don't feel disinterested and aren't wanting to work on it. And then too much peer conference. The students kind of want to talk too much. Limit it. Make them work on their own without too much help. Finally, student sharing time. This is where they publish and do that author's chair and kind of tell what they want and finish it up. Again, 5 to 10 minutes. And that is all. Thank you. Sorry that last slide was kind of rushed. I was running out of time and wanted to make sure I spoke it all through. And again, thank you for listening.